Howdy, howdy. We are live on another Friday night. A new year for a new stream. We are going back to our favorite Cardassian space station, as I like to call it. We have 6 weeks of no new Star Trek, so we're going to talk about some Star Trek Deep Space Nine. But I think this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about. We finally made it to season 6, which I've been looking forward to for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got all kinds of things to say as we close in on it.
It's going to be a lot. We're talking about 9 episodes, so we're going to go ahead and get the show started, but I'm happy to see people here. I'm Fatheree.
This is Dave.
And this is Tex-Trek.
Engage.
Welcome back aboard the Starship Texas for the 224th installment of the Tex-Trek podcast, the home of Star Trek fandom from deep in the heart of Texas, where we take a deep look at Star Trek old and new. And tonight, we're talking about Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 6, the first 9 episodes of Season 6 specifically. That's everything from A Time to Stand all the way up to statistical probabilities. So those of you that have checked out our DS9 content before, you know the way this works. Those who haven't, Dave is watching all these episodes for the first time. So he's a seasoned Star Trek viewer. He's watched a lot of Trek. DS9's the one when we started he had watched the least of, and now he's made it all the way, a third of the way into season 6. So these are all fresh experiences for him. I'm watching it for the 47th time. So this is all stuff I've been thinking about for decades. So we're coming at it from two very different perspectives, but it makes for a very, very fun conversation.
You know, Father, I've been panicking about these last few seasons. I'm worried they're going to drop the ball, just like I do anything that I like.
Right. You were talking about that recently when we were discussing Prodigy season 1, how you know, when you get towards like season finales and stuff, you tend to get a little nervous. Mm-hmm. So,
but Deep Space Nine has a pretty good track record for that for me. So, less nervous overall.
Well, that's good to know. And I actually consider, you know, the batch of episodes we'll talk about next week even better than the stuff we're talking about now. But I really like the stuff we're talking about now. So I'll be curious what you like and dislike and anything in between on these. So be sure to let everyone know.
I want to say it was hard for me making my notes on these, Father, because I'm used to sort of I got back used to the full notes on Prodigy and stuff like that, and so I made probably more detailed notes than I should. So I'm going to do my best to stay on the schedule and knock these out pretty quick tonight, so we can go episode to episode.
Yeah, we'll probably spend like, you know, the first hour or so talking about like that big 6 episode arc, and then we'll have like some more to talk about after that. But yeah, each of these episodes kind of well, I think there's 2 that kind of like really are one long story, but they just, to discuss that stuff, it's all like so linear. We'll get into that in a moment. Let me knock out some real fast housekeeping because we do have a lot to talk about, but just want to give a thank you shout out to our patrons. That's Starfleet Boy, Kick is Eternal, Gay Clevin Lunchroom, Crazy Dutchy, Joanne Robertson, Quarkspar, John Dawes, Sci-Fi Haven, and our anonymous supporters. So thank each and every one of you so very much. And Geek Filter, I made this document a while back, so it was before he had signed up, but thank you as well. And just want to remind everyone we'll be doing our Patreon watch party in the Discord server in a few days on January 14th. So be sure to check that out. We're talking about Ship in the Bottle, the second Moriarty episode, getting ready for his return in Star Trek Picard. And if anyone wants to participate in that, you can join the Tex-Trek Patreon. Also, just go check out the Discord. We have some fun conversations in there, and that's open to the public. So please check it out. Links to all of that in the description wherever you are watching or listening to this. And yeah, without further ado, Dave, do you want to let's just go ahead and dive right into season 6, episode 1, A Time to Stand, written by Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler, directed by Alan Croker. Let's give the synopsis here real quick. That is, with the Dominion on track to winning the war against the Federation, Sisko and his crew take a captured Jem'Hadar ship into enemy territory with a mission to cut off the Jem'Hadar's supply of Ketracel White in the Alpha Quadrant. So, picking up where we left off at the end of season 5 with the Dominion in control of the station, the Defiant crew forced to fight this war. Dave, I'll just let you start things off. What was your kind of general impression of actually, getting deep and dirty into the bloody Dominion war?
What's the tough thing for me when I was making notes about this was that I feel like so much happens in any given episode. There's lots and lots of big subplots going on. In this one, there's what was it? The Rotaran joins the Cisco's fleet. Worf and Jadzia are reunited. The Jem'Hadar ship, like you said, that they captured last season, is put into action. The Bajorans start returning to DS9. Wayun and Dukat are battling behind the scenes, so we've got intrigue among the villains of the show, and like everybody has something going on. Even Quark is trying to see the silver lining that the Dominion occupation now is better than the Cardassian occupation before. Like, it's just a lot of stuff, but it's a great season opener. Just from that opening pan of the sort of ragtag fleet, maybe a little. I forget what Ron Moore's involvement in this particular episode was, but it sure looked like the Galactica fleet.
Well, the fun thing about that opening image of all the defeated ships returning, because season 5, if you don't remember, season 5 ended with the Defiant getting kicked out of DS9 and the Rotaran getting kicked out of DS9, and then there's like that massive fleet, and Nog is like, we're gonna make the Dominion sorry they ever set foot in the Alpha Quadrant. And Sisko's like, Cadet, you took the words right out of my mouth. And you're like, oh man, Starfleet is ready to kick ass. Then season 6 opens like, oh wow, they've just, for 3 months they've just been defeated.
Well, we're going to be reminded over the course of the whole of all of these episodes we watched. So 9 so far to report in on. It comes up again and again that the odds are super against the Federation and its allies. And this is just like the very first black eye to remind you of it. But yeah, it's a show that doesn't like you to rest on its laurels, and it doesn't like you to feel complacent, and makes it a kind of hard. Like, it has its big victory scenes; it's not without them, but it's they're kind of few and far between. What was it, those moments on Galactica when the whole crew would applaud and cheer? That doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, they're well earned, when we get to those big, and there is a big victory, and it takes us 6 episodes to get to it, but it makes there's sweeter.
There's a scene I really liked where a small character interaction actually kind of sums up a whole lot of stuff. So Garak and Bashir are talking, and Bashir is kind of, as they're starting to really acknowledge his genetic enhancement, he says there's only a 32.7 chance of Federation victory. And Garak, kind of looking frustrated at this side of him, says, he's like, you're not genetically engineered, you're a Vulcan. And Bashir, kind of trying to play it off, says, if I'm a Vulcan, then how do you explain my boyish smile? And then Garak says, not so boyish anymore, Doctor. And that's kind of feels like where we are. Like, we've had to kind of grow up, even, smart ass woman chasing Bashir.
I'm sure the Garak and Bashir shippers out there, which there are plenty. I think they also really enjoy that moment, that conversation, for different reasons. But
no doubt.
The chemistry is undeniable.
Yeah, it's true.
One other thing I wanted to mention about that opening shot of that fleet that we see, being towed back to the starbase. Those were all models. Those are all practical models. It was kind of like the last time in Star Trek we see like a big fleet of practical models.
I've been wondering because obviously there's some big fleet stuff later, and I was like,
Right.
there's just no way all those ships are models.
And big
But
CG stuff later. So it's kind of
but
like just
honestly,
like
it's like some super good CG to come. Like it looked,
yeah,
it had the quality I expect of models, the physicality.
not to beat up on Babylon 5. It's a great show. It's the only non-Star Trek property we've ever discussed in detail on the Tex-Trek YouTube channel. It didn't make it to the
Right.
podcast, but it was on YouTube if you want to go find it. But Babylon 5 had to do CG in the 90s because they couldn't afford to build models.
Right.
Trek being, this big popular franchise, they were afforded the luxury of being able to wait until the CGI got what I would consider, like acceptable for the
Sure.
standards of Star Trek. And but yeah,
Sure.
this is kind of like you're kind of like seeing like the practical models have gotten beat up, and now then like the CG is about to take over in full force.
Well, I guess I wish CG took over in full force like that the way for everything.
But yeah,
Uh,
not always a great option to go the CG route. But DS9 season 6 does some cool stuff with it. We also had the introduction of Admiral Ross in this episode, which would Dave. I guess you've probably heard me talk about him before because I bring him up a lot. Whenever we're talking about like Admiral Vance on Discovery
sure.
or say Admiral April on Strange New Worlds. He's kind of the prototype of that recurring admiral who's not an
Hmm.
asshole.
Yeah, yeah. I will say I don't have like strong impressions at this stage. I think you having seen this 47 times, it's kind of like when somebody like Wayoon or who is it, Damar would sort of start to take a little bit more center stage. And to me, I'm just like, oh, a few more lines for a supporting character. That's interesting. And that they're destined to kind of like play these bigger roles, and you've seen it all play out. But
Mhm.
but yeah, I kind of like I don't have strong thoughts on him.
Yeah. Well, you'll see more of them throughout season 6 and 7. But yeah, I
Uh,
remember
non
Damar was the
non non-bad morals is a good thing, though. That's I can always get behind it. We want to be able to believe the Federation is a force for good and
yeah.
improvement and progressive stuff. Not that they're going to always be bad bosses like we have fucking today.
Give us some good morals.
Yes,
But y- we'll talk about Damar in a moment when we switch gears to the stuff on the station. We should talk about like the Cisco Defiant and then the Jim Hadar ship stuff first.
sure.
But that's one of the things with Damar is I remember telling you like way back in the season 4, like I know he doesn't look like much. He's just like a guy on the bird of prey with Ducat who just says like yes sir whenever Ducat gives an order. But I promise you he's going to become an important character
Yeah.
someday.
Well, you know that one of the highest compliments I have for the whole show is how organic it all feels, and that feels like the way things happen in real life. Sometimes, if you're looking at whether it's history or modern happenings, you can never quite predict who's going to come to the fore in making in changing history, and yeah, sometimes it's that second in command who, through circumstances, becomes disgruntled, overly ambitious, all of that stuff. So I've very much enjoyed watching Damar in this sixth season.
What do you think of the conversation between Cisco and his dad Joseph when Joseph is just like, why isn't there just enough space for everyone?
It's there was some lines in there so good that I wrote them down, and it's the same. It's an echo of the same thing between Bashir and Garrick. Uh, his Joseph Cisco is like, are things really as bad as the news service claims? Cisco, maybe worse. Well, you certainly know how to comfort a frightened old man. You didn't raise me to be a liar. I raised you to be a chef for all the good it did me.
They're pretty
I
good
love it,
bards.
and that when he's talking to his dad, he's gonna drop his defenses and say some real shit.
Yeah,
So yeah, like it's a great scene, but it also really emphasized to me. I'm like, man, it's bad. It's
you
terrible.
see how fatigued Cisco is. The scene prior to that when he's hanging out with Martok on Martok's like, "Where's your doctor? I need a Starfleet doctor for my arm." And then Bashir gives Cisco the news, "Oh, the Seventh Fleet, who we thought were going to be like the saviors of the Alpha Quadrant, yeah, turns out
Yeah,
they just only 14 ships made it back out of the 112 we sent." So
yeah.
you really see like the weariness on all. They feel like they've been at war for 3 months.
Right. This was like a well, Babylon 5 would also show sort of extended warfare over time, but it is not an easy thing to show. I think almost all shows, especially in that era before the modern serial format was really taking hold. Uh, the idea you want to kind of wrap up stories quick, and this is the exact opposite of that. And you don't give the viewers the satisfaction of um, of being able to rest in a way.
And I liked the Jem'Hadar ship stuff because it kind of it would have gotten boring if they were just on the Defiant and on that Starbase 375. It kind of got them onto a different set doing this really unique mission of we're gonna go in undercover in this other ship to destroy the
Mm.
Ketracel depot or whatever. And it gave Garrick something to do where he's kind of being like the first officer of, because he's the only guy who can use like the view screen thing and not get a splitting
I
headache
forget.
from it.
It's not a Cardassian ship they're on. They're on a Dominion
Right.
ship. So this is like for Jem'Hadar soldiers. Why is it
Yeah.
that do Cardassians just have some genetic propensity to be
Yeah, he
better?
just he just guessed like, oh, I saw Ducat using one of these when he invaded the
Mm,
station, so maybe it won't hurt me like it's hurting you, Cisco. And
right. Okay.
uh,
It's
it,
those things are simple but cool looking when they show the POV shots, and you can sort of see, that they're just essentially as if it was almost like a video game, and you can just,
yeah,
do this as an option. They just look through the ship and get a full 360-degree view of everything going on around them. I'm sure there's a bazillion other things it's doing, but just as a quick way to convey how powerful it is, that's pretty cool.
and their mission to blow up that base, that like first of all, like just getting there is a pain in the ass because like they're getting shot at by the Centaur, which spoilers for Prodigy season 1, but the Centaur makes an appearance and doesn't the well, I don't know. The fate of Charlie Reynolds, maybe he doesn't fare too well if he's still in command of that ship. But the trip there was a pain in the ass, and then when they're there, like everything is going wrong. It's like, oh, like they're freaking out. They don't believe us. The bomb's supposed to be going off. Well, we got to like time this just right to us, which I thought that was a clever idea of like the base is going to blow up when it starts blowing up. The force field will go down, so that will give us a window where we can escape. The security net is what they called it. But
Yeah, it's a super tense scene. It's like kind of classic suspense. Only one way for it to go right, it seems, and like about 5 or 6 ways for it to go wrong.
yeah, it's like, okay, this is gonna suck, but we're smart people. We only got a few seconds. We figured out a plan. Okay, we got a plan. Let's do the plan. Oh no, the bomb's already blowing up. Like,
Yeah, I can't remember how is it that they get out, or is that how they get like damaged, or?
yeah, the bomb went off before they like hit the gas to take off, and so that
Hmm.
that damaged their ship, and they lose their warp drive. So there's it's gonna be a long ass trip to get home, but that's they don't even
Right.
have to worry about that because they end up crashing on a planet. But that we'll talk about that in the
Yeah.
next
Yes.
episode here in a
It
second.
or goes and organically sets up the episodes to come.
Yeah, and it's cool. It gives us two like originally when we did this, because normally when we talk about these episode arcs, like the beginning of season 2, there's that Circle trilogy where the Cardassians are trying to manufacture that coup on Bajor and stuff like that, or
Hmm.
like when there's two parters. Normally we just talk about kind of like that whole arc. And initially when I was planning out how we were going to break down the season, I was like, oh yeah, maybe we should just do that for like these first 6 episodes. Then I was rewatching them. I'm like, oh no, like they are very much like their own stories. Like we have undercover ship mission here, and then we have stranded on desert planet next episode. The stuff on the station's a little bit more serialized, and I kind of like to start getting into the DS9 or Terok Nor under Dominion
Yeah.
occupation. Where as Wayoon tells Jake, "Oh, it's not an occupation. What are you talking about? This is a Cardassian station. Like, surely you don't think this is like an occupation? Like, we have this treaty with Bajor."
Jake starts to feel very grown up this season. Like, and he's obviously in a kind of an awkward stage where he's like trying himself out professionally. He's trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, but he's also being kind of a little bit of a pain in the ass to like Kira and Odo and anybody who's thinking about resistance stuff, because well they're not thinking about it, I guess, just yet, and he's kind of shames him for it. Um, but yeah, the Kira in particular is an interesting person to watch because she's supposed to keep out of trouble, and she is like the last person who can keep out of trouble when there's a bunch of Cardassians occupying.
Yeah, it makes my skin crawl watching this episode. The scenes of Dukat and Kira. I hate how when he's gloating in front of her, and he's such a creep. Like he's like she knows that he has like these feelings towards her, and he knows that like she does not return them. But he's like, I don't care. I'm just gonna like wear you down. I'm gonna make you like me. And it's just I don't know. It's creepy and like I hate like when he like touches her face. And you know what bothers me just as much? I
Mm.
hate when he's holding the baseball. It's like, keep your hands off Kira, but also keep your hands off that baseball.
Yeah, yeah, no. It's like a violation. It's I mean, that's all there is to it. In the 90s, there was, I'm going to say, a decidedly sort of less respect for those kind of boundaries, and the trope, the myth of pursuit as this romantic thing to win over, especially women, was still in the ether, I say. And so I wonder if there's like, I mean, there's no doubt we're supposed to consider Gul Dukat a creepy bastard, but they always did their best to humanize him, and I did wonder if like it was meant to come off, if not somewhat more positive, as a quasi redeeming feature of him, like, oh, I know what it's like to have loved and lost, or to want somebody who doesn't want you too. I actually feel a little kinship with Gul Dukat. I don't know.
No,
That
by
was
this point, but by this point, the writers were like, no, we're going full blown villain with him.
I mean, he's pretty bad in it, but you will still go on to see, I mean, I guess him care for his daughter, although there's always this possessive ownership quality to it. It's so clear that he also just he wants her approval, but like as a matter of control.
Yeah, he basically he wants the whole galaxy to think how great he is, and
He
yeah,
often talks, or I don't know if it's in this episode or others, but he talks about how the Bajorans weren't grateful to him. No, it's a future episode. They weren't grateful to him for the relative lack of cruelty under his
yeah.
occupation and stuff.
He's brought that up before.
Yeah,
But
I was thinking he kind of had.
there's more of that to come in episodes to come. But yeah, it's just the whole thing with Dukat, and then the whole thing with Quark. He's kind of like the first, and it kind of makes sense for him, but he's kind of the first one to become a bit complacent and just like, you know what, I'm just gonna accept Dominion rule. And we kind of slowly see like Kira, it's almost like she's like losing like more and more people. We see Odo kind of get soft on the Dominion eventually, and Quark, and it's like it's really like the big thing that happens in the next episode that kind of snaps her out of it. I don't know if
Yeah,
you have
if
anything
there's,
else.
let me see. But I do like the thematic of how you become complacent, essentially
Yeah.
under a certain presentation of fascism. That if it's not directly stepping on your throat every day, you can start to think, maybe, like, or this isn't the worst. Maybe it's better to at least be in a. It could be worse. There's worse possibilities.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of like, oh yeah, like you can maybe change the system by becoming a part of it and just hope for like some slow reform, and like, oh, that's not too bad, right? Like,
and I did want to mention this one other thing that I liked about this episode. Actually, two things real quick. One is I liked Kira kind of convincing Odo to use his founder status to get on the council for the station, and it's because Wayun will look
mhm.
up to him so much and will kind of defer to him, and that's going to give him some power. And that seems like a good idea. But I can't remember. They're aware that this is also like a sort of a win for Wayun too, because it validates
Right.
the Dominion rule.
Right, and it also it puts Odo in a situation where he can become more compromised.
Right. So there's like it's one of those things where like, oh, that seems like a cool idea. I'd like to see that forward movement, but it's also like, oh shit, did they just get trapped by this? And given what happens to Odo, kind of, yeah. I did want to mention that this is that there's more. They continue to work on Nog and will continue to, during this story arc. I think we talked about this, maybe was it when we were talking about Prodigy, but that he is kind of like the anti Wesley. Like it felt like they wanted to develop and mature him in a way that we never got to see with Wesley. Well, they did, but it kind of happened in very fits and starts. It did not feel real organic. It just kind of happened sometimes. So just continue to like that, and sort of wish. Oh, it's too bad that Will Wheaton didn't quite have that strength of arc writing that they got to do on Nog.
And I would also like to point out that, today on day recording, January 6th, is Aaron Eisenberg's birthday.
Mm,
So there's
right
a
on.
there's a good thing about January 6th. Also, Spock's birthday in universe is January 6th.
Yeah, we'll take what good we can sometimes.
Let's keep talking about the stuff on the station and go into the second episode of season 6. Rocks and how do you say this word? Shoals. I
Yep.
always feel like I'm saying it wrong, but
No, Shoals is right, just as if it was
okay.
Sholes.
I see it written. I don't hear it said, but it's like it's an old naval term about like beaching a ship.
Yeah, I think
It's
aren't shoals? Isn't that like rocky like shorelines or something?
yeah.
Yeah.
Which this is an episode about a beached ship. But before we talk about that, we'll talk about some of the station stuff. I'm just gonna uh, read this. This was written by Ronald D. Moore, directed by Michael Vahar. Cisco's crew crash land their Jem'Hadar ship into the waters of an alien ocean on a world where a group of Jem'Hadar have also crash landed with only one vial of Ketracel White remaining. Meanwhile, on Terok Nor, Kira finds she cannot live with herself working side by side with the Dominion. And I want to give a shout out to Vedic Yasm, or I believe was her name. But yeah, she's basically like the Star Trek version of like those monks who would protest the Vietnam War by setting themselves on fire. When
Right.
Kira's like, no, you can't have a protest, and she's like, oh yeah, watch me. But the way that
Yeah, and
it's shot and everything.
Jake also kind of rightly calls that one when she's like, "Oh, they're just going to use it as an excuse to crack down on us." And Jake's like, "So you're gonna what does he say? So you're forbidding protests?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, come on, we're not doing that." But it's starting to get through to her. So she's starting to realize that this is this approach is not going to work.
Yeah, she's becoming a collaborator. Like she's becoming someone who she would have assassinated during the occupation when she was a freedom fighter.
Right. But
And
you can absolutely see the path there. Again,
right.
she's supposed to keep DS9 stable.
Well, in
And
last week's
that's
episode, let's get Odo on the council. Let's get the Bajoran security team back. Okay, that's a good idea. And like, but then all of a sudden, the Bajoran security team is doing the Dominion's dirty work. It's like, yeah, you see where the line was crossed. So
mhm.
just casually and naturally, and
There's a
that is
great
frightening.
there's a great shot where she just does that slow look around of the is it the promenade, and
Oh,
she
it's
just
when she's
sees like kind
off.
of what is it what's that?
She's in ops
Oh,
when she sees
you're
all
right.
the Jem'Hadar and Cardassians.
Yeah, she just sees that this whole place, she's just basically surrounded by her enemies, and it has become like somewhat second nature. She's come to accept it on some level, and you can like feel her kind of internal self-loathing at like, oh shit. Like it's like she kind of is coming to that moment.
Yeah, and like if it
Uh,
could happen to Kara, it could happen to anyone. When she's like, "Thank you, Mavic," to the guy
right.
like bringing her coffee, it's like, wow, like that is like you never thought you would see it, but yet it does. Like you say, like it does feel like so organic that we could have gotten there.
Mm. And she's a person who kind of she's done her time. Like she fought in the revolution, so she deserves a life where she can rest and relax and not have to fight these fights again. So it's just very unfair. It's a sad and sad. Not like it's not as if she hasn't done her revolution already. Turns out
Yeah,
you can't get complacent, I guess.
I've mentioned this before when we were discussing DS9 over the years, but as a kid watching the show for the first time, I always felt so sorry for Kira. I don't know if it's just like the way like Nana visitors, like just like when I see like her face sad, it makes me sad.
Mm,
But I notice it tends full disclosure, like it tends to be like cute women actors that have that effect on me, but I've noticed that in the past, like when they're sad, it makes me really sad when I'm watching. I don't know if that was it or what, but yeah, I used as a kid I would like stress about this. I would worry about her so
Mm.
much, and she was a character a lot
She,
of people would complain about.
one of the reasons I sort of gravitated to her character early on in our DS9 watch was because she is also, I think, really good at being emotive. And like to as a quick counterpoint, O'Brien goes through a lot of hell too, and it's not like I don't think that we're like seeing those O'Brien must suffer episodes don't have like an effect. But yeah, maybe there is something I think to the way she can express that emotion. It's the fact that she can be so tough at times and then sort of show this vulnerability and like you kind of really feel for her. And it may be that we're both like come from a time when we're also just a sucker for a pretty face. And that's just is what it is.
But I do like when she does get the fire lit under her ass, and she's talking to Odo about let's have like a full blown resistance, and Odo's like, I'm not sure if that's a good. And she's like, no, Odo, I can do this with you on my side, or I can do this with you against me, but I'm doing it, one way or another.
Yep. I as I was like making notes and I revisited this episode briefly and I was like, oh, she's like I don't want to be fighting against you, Odo, and I was like, oh wow, that's prescient. That's that really sets up something that's going to happen in just an episode or two.
Well, let's talk about the ship stuff on the planet. We get one of my favorite recurring actors in Star Trek. He's one of those guys who keeps showing up, different shows, different characters. But Phil Morris, I talked about him in season 5. He played one of the Klingons that showed up in that season. He was the little kid in the army helmet in Miri in the original series. So he's been in Star Trek ever since he was a child. I got to see him at Star Trek Las Vegas and talk to him a little bit a couple of months ago. That was really cool. And he's done like a lot of stuff like outside of Star Trek that I'm a fan of. He does a lot of like voice work and animation, and he does a lot of like DC stuff. He was a Martian Manhunter on Smallville. But yeah, Phil Morris has this really cool Jem'Hadar. He's my favorite Jem'Hadar in the entire show, I guess. The third who's commanding these men, because the first and second died, but their Vorta commander is so bitter he won't promote this guy to first because he got his orders questioned by him.
Mm-hmm.
So he remains third.
This is a really well drawn character, and I in a lot of ways it's like such a Ron Moore episode because it really wants to twist the knife a lot, and there's I'll talk about it more at the end, but there's something that I'm like, well, all right, I'm going to go ahead and say it now. I'm like, I can't recall another time on any Star Trek show where essentially the lead officers, engaged in a slaughter. I know that they didn't set it up, they didn't choose it, they were trying to do everything they could avoid it, but they slaughter those soldiers at the end, and it's a hand that they were forced into by a clever Vorta. And I was like, that's messed up on Star Trek. That is very messed up.
Yeah, and that Vorta Kevin, that actor is so, I don't know his name. I should look into him, but I think he does such a good job here. There, he does very much like he feels like the same species as Weyoun, as what Jeffrey Combs is doing, but he's not copying that. He's a different character, but you still kind of feel that. It's kind of like, like all Klingons kind of act Klingonish, all Vulcans act Vulcanish. It's harder to pin down like what makes a Vorta. It's really hard to like to describe it, but like it when you see it. And you see it with him, for sure.
Well, they're kind of like innately political creatures, innately sort of manipulative. Their words are always kind of meant to poke through defenses. They're what do you call it? Sisko in the episode is when he's kind of trying to wage a little bit of a psyop war and win over. What's the name of the Jem'Hadar guy?
Klamadakon, I believe.
Ramada Klan.
Ramada Klan.
I think I wrote it down.
Ramada Klan. That sounds right.
He's talking about having witnessed a coup essentially by some other Jem'Hadar against a failing Vorta commander.
Season 4 episode To the Death.
Yeah, and he describes them. He's clearly trying to be a little he himself is trying to manipulate in a way like a Vorta. But yeah, he says that they're manipulative, they're cowardly. He's pointing out all the ways they are not like the Jem'Hadar, and hoping to drive that wedge between them. And it reminded me. I think I've brought this up before, maybe even recently. But there's that samurai comic book Usagi Yojimbo. Happens to be about a rabbit samurai, but it actually sort of takes its samurai lore seriously. And there was an issue or a storyline I remember from years and years ago, decades ago, where two samurai he runs up against the samurai who's essentially serving an evil lord, and they talk about this kind of like an axiom within their culture, within their military culture, that it's the samurai who loyally serves an evil lord is actually a greater samurai than the one who serves a good lord, because that quality of loyalty is tested hardest in him, and he's truest to the samurai oath of loyalty. So it kind of shows you where their values are. And it's like, and I remember reading that for the first time, and it was just so alien. I was just like, that is so weird and like fascinating. And that is what is happening in this episode, though. To the Jem'Hadar, this is like the way that they have to live.
That's how Phil Morris described his acting in this episode. Is he said that's the way he approached it, was as a samurai who has to serve some bastard who happens to be his master.
Oh, they literally use that analog. That's cool. And yeah, I love that guy. The guy who plays is Kevin.
Yeah,
is that the Vorta? He does. His delivery is. It's not like it's dripping with malice. He's not over the top. In fact, he's injured and on his back, and yet on his back he still commands this power. He is in a spot. He doesn't have enough Ketracel white for them, and he also he's going to die if he doesn't get help. So his first thing is he trades some prisoners to that he's captured Quark and Garrick, and in return for some Noggin Garrick, and get some medical attention for himself, and then he realizes that these guys, when they run out, are going to sort of go on a killing spree. And I was looking at it from his perspective at first, and I was like, he's right. I don't know a way out of it. Eventually, Sisko does actually come up with a pretty good alternate plan, but it's too late because these loyal foot soldiers won't do it. And yet, you know that Ramataclan is. He's cognizant enough. He does seem to have a little bit more going on than your average Jem'Hadar soldier. He's cognizant enough that this is kind of messed up, that this is not how things should be, to know to really be this tragic figure when he gets sacrificed.
The fun part of this episode for me, though, is like some of the banter between Nog and Garrick. I guess there's like some fun stuff with like Sisko trying to like keep morale light, and when he's joking around with Dax, injured Dax, about like her stay at the hotel. But the Nog and Garrick stuff's really good.
The sort of like, this felt very natural when they're just climbing out of the water, and they notices that like O'Brien's pants are torn, and he just kind of starts laughing at it. Like, it's just that kind of giddy laughter that's just like a release when you've just been like, you're exhausted or you're just stressed to the absolute max, and they've just barely survived this crash, and like he starts laughing, and everybody, including O'Brien, starts laughing because they just need that release. There's these good moments, but I know what you're talking about with Garrick and Nog. It's the one where Nog is like, I am not. What does he say? I'm not going to like walk. I'm
not
going
to turn my back on you. Yeah, like you walk in front of me.
You're a little backstabbing person.
Yeah, I mean, like he had him captured at Empok Nor when Garrick went crazy and captured Nog.
I couldn't remember the context for it. It was the big Garrick episode.
Yeah. But Sisko, like he's lost his ship. He's like stranded on this. All he's got is like the clothes on his back and a couple of phaser rifles, and a few survivors from that ship. This is how like defeated he is here. And so over the course of like the next few episodes, like he'll go from here to reclaiming the station, which is it does make that victory taste so sweet. You wouldn't be able to enjoy that as much if you didn't suffer through this first. And his anger at the end when
Oh
when they
man.
are forced to kill all these Jem'Hadar.
Yeah, it's if you know that if they didn't have the broadcast and standards limitations, he was going to say some words there, some impolite non-family words. It's almost like he self-censors, um, because yeah, they have to slaughter these guys. They still lose one of their own. The Jem'Hadar aren't pushovers by any means. And then this guy just comes walking out. He's like, "I surrender." And it's kind of like if you ever seen The Untouchables, when the guy
Mm.
who's done some very bad things in it, I'm going to say, he surrenders to Kevin Costner's character, and he real sleazily, he's like, "Arrest me, Mr. Treasury Man, come on," and it doesn't go well for him. But that was because that was his big cathartic moment. Is that this guy doesn't get out of it, but this guy does, because the Vorta is smarter than that dude in the movie who's just a henchman. Um,
But yeah,
and
Kevin wins.
Cisco knows he's been had, yeah, and he's just ultimately, of course, I guess if you want a big picture look at it, Kiva wins, but that ship that they got is a huge win. Like that, like it becomes very important for him. But uh, well, actually, no. They don't win the ship in this one. They already have the ship. I don't know what I'm saying.
They lose the ship.
They lose the ship. Yeah. What do they get anything?
You're thinking of the episode when they got the ship in season.
You're right.
5.
You're right. I guess they get off the planet because he gives them what they need to get their communications up and running.
To call Worf and the Klingons to come rescue them.
Arguably, Cisco being so vital to the war effort, this was worth it. But yes, absolutely, in the moment, the Vorta
and they
wins.
have a Dominion prisoner now, but they have like this captured Vorta, so.
It's true. It's true. I guess it's the last we'll ever hear of him, or I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
All right. Yeah. Don't tell me. Don't tell me. But yes, this was a really good dark episode, real focused. There is the backstory that's on DS9, but otherwise it's a nice sort of focused break from the all the station intrigues and stuff. Yeah, it's one of my favorite of the season.
Well, then let's talk about what happens after they get picked up by the Klingons, and we get the episode "Sons and Daughters," written by Bradley Thompson and David Weddle, directed by Jesus Salvador Trevino. Alexander Rozhenko joins the crew of the Rotaran, much to the disappointment of Worf. On Terok Nor, Toraziel returns to the station, where Dukat intends to use her to get closer to Major Kira. So yeah, this is a story about a son and about a daughter, so aptly named Sons and Daughters. We have Alexander and Zial. Let's talk about Alexander first. Dave, you had asked me recently, like, do we ever see Alexander again after TNG? And I was like, yeah, he does show up in DS9, so here it is.
When he first spots him and he's like, there's like a roll call of the new recruits, which like they wanted 15 and they only got 5, so things are already a bit rough.
War is hell.
When he talks, he's got this kind of deeper voice than I expected. Is like just, and I was like, oh, did he go off and secretly become a badass? for just a minute, I was like, this kid's gonna be trouble, and he's trouble, but in a different way, because this is about the difficult thing where he may not ever live up to Worf standards. He does not have it in him. He is kind of in a desperate act here of. I can't remember. Does he ever just straight up vocalize Fatheree that he's like trying to do this to in some way connect with his father or like die?
No, I think he was doing it to die. This is my theory.
Okay.
Is that like Alexander?
I was thinking, he didn't quite ever say as much as Martok and Worf try and get him to say it. It's a little bit nebulous.
Because we know, like, he didn't want to be a warrior. We saw that in Next Generation.
Utterly
and, disappointment for Worf. The story was created because the writers must have been like, oh, we've been ignoring Alexander for so long. Let's actually, shine a light on that and be like, yeah, Worf, why haven't you, talked to your son or whatever?
Right. And it was not to say there's a good reason for it. It's to say, oh, you done screwed up, man.
Yeah. So they didn't, they didn't like pull any punches. They kind of beat up Worf and be like, yeah, this guy's being a shitty dad. Let's tell a story about that.
It's when Martok, who's basically Worf's adopted father at this point, says he's
or big brother. I think he's more like a big brother, but yeah.
Right. When he says he's like, in all this time I've known you, he's like, you've never even told me you had a son. I'm like, man,
which is that's fucked up.
That does not look good.
But
and I appreciate them allowing for it, and allowing his character that kind of growth, but also that kind of flaw. There's no real excusing it.
But my theory on why Alexander is here on the Rotaran is that when his dad has stopped living with him, stopped communicating with him, whatever. He's like really pissy about that. And so he's like, oh, okay, so like you don't love me or value me as a son. I'll go like join the Klingon Defense Force and die in this war, and do like the glorious Klingon thing, and then make you sad and then you'll miss me, and then you'll appreciate me, and then you'll feel bad for trying to push me to be a warrior and stuff like that. He denies it. He tells Worf like, no, this has nothing to do with you. But yeah, I don't believe that.
I think you're right. Yes, it has something of any. This is not to invalidate sort of where suicidal ideation comes from for people, but that it is pretty common for like people to at least have some element of that in their teens, and think like about how doing it would hurt people, and like I think he is kind of doing it to hurt Worf. He may not, obviously it's not like some grand master plan, but that is the emotional thing that I think brought him to that place. Is he's like, I'll die, and he's gonna feel so sad, and this will be the best way I can hurt him.
They did soap opera age him up, because I think he's only 8 years old at this point, but he looks like he's much older than that. But he kind of always aged fast. When he was, I think that Klingons age like 2 or 3 times faster than human children, because when he was 2, he looked more like a 4 to 6 year old.
Wait a second. How old was he supposed to be when he was like, I don't know, having a mud bath with
Lwaxana? He would have been like 4 or 5, but he seemed more like he was like 12.
There had to have been like more years between that scene and this DS9 though, right? That's like at least the 6 years of DS9 that it took to get there. So that does put him at older than 8.
That was 4 years. That was 4 years earlier. That TNG scene. Because TNG season 7 took place at the same time as DS9 season 2, and now we're on season 6. So this is 4 more years after. This is 4 years after Mudbath with Lwaxana.
Yeah. I know it's a little bit of a Hollywood movie magic.
Was that a season? That might have been season 6 TNG. So this might be 5 years, but yeah, hasn't been.
But they needed him for practical purposes to be kind of older. So yeah.
And different species age at different rates. So he was always aging. We see him conceived in season 2 of TNG, and he aged pretty quickly on that show. So I felt like it was kind of keeping in the same.
I can squint and roll with it. It's it's weird because sometimes like races like Klingons or Vulcans that are human enough, they have a lot of human mannerisms, even though they're supposed to be pretty culturally different. It's like, well, if some races live a long time, and that's weird for us to wrap our mind around. The notion of anybody of maturing faster, that's not something we see as often. We're definitely used to long-lived races like elves and stuff from fantasy novels. But it's a little weirder to have like an 8-year-old who's basically like a 16-year-old. But yeah, certainly, and certainly just if you look at older times, they'd be like, oh yeah, I ran away from home when I was 8, and I served on a steamship when I was 10. And you're just like, really? So yeah, I'll allow it.
But I don't even think it's anything we have to like try to allow or make
right.
For. Just Klingon children grow up fast. We saw like a Jem'Hadar kid grows up in like 2 days. They become like a full adult. And it's like with Klingons, it's not quite that fast, but it's still pretty fast. But Martok gets a lot of cool stuff in here. It's just nice to have. I guess Klingons could have like a lot of toxic elements of their culture if you want to look at it seriously. Just a lot of the machismo and just kind of the way that they have
it's a lot of the same machismo that that goes on, or that was a tradition in our very modern military.
Yeah.
The idea that you toughen up, you become loyal to your friends or to your ship's allies. Yeah, they might kick your ass even sometimes, but you're gonna bond because of it. And
but it's cool to see like a Klingon who actually like, oh yeah, he's actually like really supportive, and he's like a good friend to these people that he's welcoming into his family, and he gives good advice to people, and I love Martok. He's the best Klingon.
The scene where he's kind of like practicing with Alexander and tries to get through to him is particularly good. He does some tough love in there, but for a Klingon, he's actually kind of being a big softy. And we'll see that actually many Klingons have that side of them at some point. It's just a side that they don't publicly reveal. They're at least always publicly turning on the machismo.
And the other Klingons are kind of cool. Like the Klingon bully on the ship, he kind of, he's still got Alexander's back when like they go into battle and stuff. And
I mean, yeah, it is, in that sense, it is kind of like the way that the military works sometimes, more in previous decades, but I know it's still a big part of it now, where, yeah, you might give somebody shit, but there is a sort of bond of just that you're under such stressful situations that, yeah, when the shit hits the fan, you're kind of like, oh, yeah, I beat this dude up at the mess hall, but I would also potentially give my life for them. So it's
kind of like Adam Baldwin's scumbag character in Full Metal Jacket.
Oh yeah, Animal Mother.
Oh yeah, Animal Mother.
Yeah,
that's a great name for a bastard.
Yes, he's so terrible in that. Just and also a war criminal. But
you know what else is terrible is that my uncle, who served in the entire Vietnam War, from beginning to end, he said that is the most realistic Vietnam movie he's ever seen.
Yikes, that's unnerving. I rewatched it just recently. I think it's a great movie, by the way, but yeah, it's a lot. By the way, Father, as far as like intense lines, when Worf, before he is able to sort of reforge stuff with Alexander near the end, he says the Jem'Hadar will cut you to pieces. And Alexander says, then I'll be dead and you'll be happy. And I'm like, that's, that pretty much cuts to the heart of both. Like, I think, you're right. That is what Alexander's motivation was. And it shows how much Worf did fail him, in his time.
Yeah. On the station, though, they have their little resistance with Jake and Odo and Kira. They're, having to exist under Damar and Dukat and Weyoun being assholes, but then Ziyal shows up, and she's forgiven her dad. He was like willing to blow up the station in season 5 with her on it. Keep in mind though, like he was mad at her because he didn't like her hanging out with Garrick. And Dukat, being as egocentric as he is, he thought like, oh, Kira, it's because you resist me, because you're resentful to me, even though I'm this great man who you should bow down and love and appreciate. But because you're just the spiteful bitch, you've turned my daughter against me. And Kira's like, what the hell are you talking about, Dukat? Like, yeah. she wants to be friends with this other. I don't even like Garrick, but yeah, I get like she wants to be friends, maybe more with this other Cardassian. Like, just not everything's about you, Dukat. But in that moment, in his anger, he clearly does have some feelings for Ziyal. He at one point he threw away his career and his wife and other family to spare her life. So he does have like some, as twisted as he is. You're right, Dave. When you mentioned earlier, he does have like some genuine feelings for Ziyal, but it's always kind of fucked up with Dukat. Like here, like he is repairing his relationship with his daughter, I think partly because he does have feelings for her, but also partly because he wants to like trap Kira and be like, oh, look at like this kid you've become a surrogate mother to. Now you're going to be in my life more, and I'm going to buy you a pretty dress. And
yeah, he's like, you are coming to the party tonight for Ziyal. right? You're going to come to Zial's party just for Zial. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
he's absolutely trying to manipulate her into it. And she also has one of those sort of come to Jesus moments when she's looking at the dress. And I think does she do a thing where she's like, "Oh, this is so pretty." She's looking at it in the mirror and she's like, "What a great dress." And then she's like, "What am I doing?"
Yeah. And that is the one moment, like, this kind of seems redundant after her big turn in the second episode when
It's
she's like
true.
looking around at all like the Jem'Hadar and Cardassians. The reason I think that that's in there is because they were having to rewrite these episodes, and some writers changing something in one episode and then the other writer had to change something else, and some of the stuff was even shot out of order because they had to go on
Mm,
location for the previous episode, and so they had to shoot this stuff first. And this writers' room wasn't, it was the 90s. People didn't write a lot of television like this. This is documented. You can read, Ron Moore and Hans Beimler have talked about this. And I think that's why this happened. There's some more like really tight string continuity stuff like this in DS9 that happens in season 7 though. And when they do it there, it is so flawless. Like they got
mm.
like the kinks worked out here at these 6 episodes, so they're able to do an even better job of this type of stuff in season
Interesting.
7. Yeah,
I
it
mean,
holds up so well.
I still think it works because, like,
Hmm.
well, you can feel like you've made a big change and still waver, and the personal connection with Zial, because she's like a big sister slash surrogate mom even at times to Zial. So yeah, I can see why that might make her resolve waver, her resolve to just start fighting back. So I think it works. But
But
that's interesting that it was, yeah, that it is. You're not wrong. It's a little repetitive.
yeah, but I feel like that's like the only bump in the road in the 6 episode arc. You couldn't tell that, like, oh yeah, these were writers that were completely unused to this format and they were scrambling behind the scenes to pull it off. It
Hmm.
really does work. Let's move on to season 6, episode 4, Behind the Lines, written by Renee Echeverria, directed by LeVar Burton. So we have a Geordie directed episode. When Kira's resistance cell learns that the Dominion will soon be bringing down the Federation minefield, they plot to hinder the enemy's progress. But matters are complicated when the female changeling arrives on Terok Nor and pays Odo a visit. Meanwhile, Captain Sisko is relieved of command of the Defiant, while Jadzia commands it on a mission. A mission we don't see, by the way, but we have the victory party at the end that bookends the episode. Their ritual on the Defiant with the spent battery, the power cell from the phaser relay.
That very much feels like a proto Battlestar Galactica scene.
Yeah,
Um,
this is Ron
a
Moore taking notes. Like, I'm gonna go do my own show after this.
a little leaning into sort of military tradition and the way you would keep morale up. I was worried about Dax going off on that mission alone because I didn't know where they were going to take that storyline. And I'm like, well, Dax has always been shown to be competent, but I don't think I've seen her command combat missions like that. But she's of course she's a skilled commander. She knows what she's doing.
Yeah, and I like that they remembered she was a science officer in the middle of all this war stuff, and it's like, oh, because it's the Argolis cluster, and it has, these weird gravitational eddies, or whatever there's protostar clusters, and it's like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, like Jadzia here is actually an expert on that shit. Like she can get the Defiant in and out of there, destroy that
Yeah,
that sensor
yeah.
relay.
She'll bring some stuff to the table that Cisco wouldn't, honestly.
And it gave Cisco the opportunity to be the what's it called, the adjutant. That's another weird word I don't say
Yeah,
very often.
he's adjutant to the fleet admiral. Is that the
Yeah,
deal?
to Admiral Ross.
Right, helping advise him on big decisions and stuff like that. It's the place they don't usually like in Star Trek. You almost never want to stop being an active captain and become sort of part of the bigger planning network,
Mm.
or you've left the exciting dramatic side. But with Cisco, I don't think they fell into any major traps with that.
I've
He
heard
felt like a
some
guy who should be making the big decisions.
I've heard some fan theories that Cisco is such a conniver that he might have manipulated his way into being Ross's selection. But I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think he's just a really
I,
competent
I don't think there's anything
strategist.
indicated in the episode necessarily, but it could be a it's not it's not one of those super crazy fan theories.
But he does have to plan the. It's almost like planning like the invasion of Normandy or something, and you like I'm a big fan of the movie The Longest Day. Speaking of war movies, and there's a kind of a big build up to the invasion.
Right.
And
For people who don't know that, like you said, that is D-Day.
yes.
Shown in a very what I would call a procedural way that shows a lot of the detail and planning and bureaucracy and how it was all coordinated.
It's still incredibly entertaining. A big budget movie from the early '60s or maybe late '50s, and it has a hell of a cast. A lot of big actors, people who would go on to become big actors are in it. So it's a good film. It's a long one, but it's worth it. That's kind of the same thing of like the anticipation for like this big invasion that you're going to try to pull off, and who knows if it'll work. And the station stuff is also really interesting here.
I love the opening of this.
Yeah, we open with Odo and Kira monitoring, or no, I'm sorry, Odo. No, not Odo at all. We open with
Rom.
Kira and Rom watching, Rom's handiwork. He pickpocketed Damar's pad about like maybe we should poison the last batch of Ketracel White if we're not going to be able to make any more. And then the Jem'Hadar found that, and it caused a fight in Quarks. It turns lethal. There's like Jem'Hadar, like Cardassians, literally killing each other in this fight.
Yeah, the way it's staged, where they're watching it happen and kind of talking to each other as they imagine what's being said, and they're pretty accurate to it. It showed us that Rom, while always a little on the dense side, could roll with these kind of like more guileful plans that they were starting to do as the Resistance. And they just like, it's like some of the coolest sort of spy crafty heisty moments of it, but also brutal. Like you say, people are clearly getting killed. It looked like some Cardassian got his back broken when one of those one of the Jem'Hadar just hoists him up and just bam.
Yeah. when Dukat and Weyoun come in to like clean up, they're like standing over corpses, and Weyoun's like, just keep smiling. Keep up appearances. We're all friends in the Dominion. So that was cool. And there is at one point in one of these episodes, Weyoun does refer to Rom as the diabolical mastermind. So, but the big thing here is that the resistance cell is really tested when Odo, he's distracted by the founder who comes aboard and is linking with him and doing more.
Yep.
It's like, oh, this is like humanoid style sex.
That was
weird. That's in the next
that was
episode.
Weird. Right. But the whole time that all of the interactions between the female changeling, is she usually just referred to by that?
I think the scripts always call her the female changeling. I think it's easier just to call her the founder. That's what most of these episodes they call her the founder.
Sure, but then I feel like I'm part of the Dominion and I'm having to defer to her. Anyway, the founder lady, she the whole time when he's with her, I was always like, is Odo playing her? Is he's clearly like, even if he's setting her up to to manipulate, to help his friends, then there's some part of him that is invested, but like, is he playing her at all? And I'm like, as things will play out, I believe the answer is no. He was legitimately tempted and brought in to the point where I think it's in the next episode that he's like, basically they've been in his quarters for like 3 days, and he's like missed meetings and important stuff, and he doesn't know that like Rom is going to be sentenced to death and all this stuff, and he's just completely missed it because they were having a big love-in.
Yeah, Jill 47, our live audience, is asking which episode is the one where Nog gets caught because Odo flakes off. This one, and yes, this is the episode. The Resistance puts together like a good plan. They have
it's Rom, right? Not Nog, though. Right?
Or I'm sorry, yes, it is Rom.
I've been blurring them too.
Meant,
so yeah.
But the Resistance has a good plan. Quark takes a more active role, which is a pretty big deal for him.
It is.
He's getting information from Damar. They build up Damar as this. I wouldn't say he's a three-dimensional character yet. But I think he's become two-dimensional. They've given a little bit of depth to him.
Yep.
He's very spiteful towards the Bajorans, kind of like a standard, what we'd expect, like a standard military Cardassian. He's got a bit of a drinking problem, perhaps. He's spending a lot of time at the bar. So a guy like that, who's the...
and what do you call it? Court gets him talking.
Yes, yeah. The one person that he would trust would probably be his bartender. And so yes, Quark drinks the Kanar with Damar. I got a bottle of Kanar for Christmas, by the way, a couple of weeks ago. It's already been consumed, but
nice.
But yeah, so he gets drunk with Damar, gets the information, and there's a little bit of levity. They're giving him the coffee when he comes into the resistance meeting, trying to explain. But yeah, basically, okay, we have Rom. He's a smart dude. He can bring down the array, so that the Damar's plan of how to deactivate the mines doesn't work. Odo, all you got to do is make sure the security grid is offline, because you're going to do this diagnostic at that time. They got this perfect plan, and it would have gone off without a hitch probably. But yeah, Odo was distracted linking. And and failed to do his part. So that, but the way that they describe it is, he says it's like paradise. It's like, yeah, it's like, when they link, it's like, it must feel like, you're shooting up heroin or something. It's just like, and a guy who's like always felt like an outsider, always longed for his people. Like he feels that connection. He feels like, where he belongs.
Right, and unlike heroin, it's he, at least as he perceives it, there's no immediate ill effects. It's like there's no downside.
It's like what he's hardwired to do. Like he's like what he's like.
Yeah,
designed.
That becomes
to do.
his Ketracel. It becomes his Ketracel White.
Yeah, so she has this hold over him, kind of, and there's a as evil as the founder lady is, there's the strange warmth, towards Odo. I guess it's not even strange.
Well,
they've been
in the next episode. In the next episode, Wei-Un will compliment her, and he's like, "Oh, you've very masterfully neutralized Odo," and she's like, "That's not what I was doing." She's like, "I really want him back into the link," so it's true.
Yeah, she says like she wants him more than the entire Alpha Quadrant.
Yeah.
That's how full of themselves they are. That's how much they love each other.
Yeah. Jill says, again in the comments, she says it really freaked her out what Odo did to Rom. And yes, as I was just saying, I totally agree. I was like, surely he must be playing her. There's no way that Odo just... But yes way. Odo has been so... they didn't always explain it, but always in the background of his character is how utterly lonely he is. And disconnected in many ways to other people. And finally he has that connection with, I'm going to say, a lot of sexual fulfillment, but like times 100 apparently. So yeah, he really did, just as Worf really did fail his son, and he really did fail Rom and Kira and the Resistance. And that's some pretty great drama.
Well, let's get into these next two episodes. They'll kind of like flow into one another, but Favor the Bold followed by Sacrifice of Angels. We'll just talk about Favor the Bold first, but this is the beginning of our efforts to recapture the station. Written by Ira Stephen Bear and Hans Beimler, directed by Winrick Colby. Tired of being on the losing end of war, Captain Sisko convinces Starfleet Command to launch a fleet of starships to retake Deep Space Nine. Meanwhile, time may be running out for Rom. So yeah, Rom is locked up. They're getting ready to execute the Ferengi, bring down the minefield.
Both sides of those story have people very much petitioning desperately to get something done. In Rom's case, they're desperately trying to keep him from being executed. It's like Kira's going to the Bajoran Council, and Quark has talked to the Grand Nagus. And over in Sisko's storyline, they're trying to get the Gowron, Chancellor Gowron, to sign off on sending over a fleet.
Well, they had to sell it to Starfleet first. I mean, that was
and sell to Starfleet first, yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of an uphill battle, because those admirals were like, if we give you all these ships, that leaves Earth vulnerable. But Sisko argued that's a risk we have to be willing to take, because if those mines come down, it's all over anyways.
Yep. It's I know those mines are essentially a plot contrivance, but In the same way that technology sometimes determines, the follow through of various of battles, that is essentially that is what they pick to be the thing that forces people to organize around,
the
whether to stop it.
Self-replicating minds kind of always bugged me. That always felt like a bit of a stretch. But everything else around this is so good. I find it easy to forgive.
The thing is, like, yes, it's like that as a plot device, it's a plot device. But does technology, like, I remember, like, even as far back as the first Gulf War, just how vital the Scuds and Patriot missiles were. It was just kind of constantly in the news. Those missiles that could shoot down other missiles and missiles that could not be shot down and things like that.
Oh,
and it was just
the
like
Nintendo War stuff.
Yeah, but the technology
was
it was front and center, and this is just a case of a slightly Deus Ex Machina technology being front and center, but the actual basis for it very real. If not mines, not those specific mines, but that kind of storyline.
And I think the important thing, and I guess like in any time you're dealing with like war or big battles or anything, especially like in a science fiction setting, but it's important that your audience understands, what the objectives are, what you're trying to do, who's winning, who's losing, what ship belongs to what side.
It's got to always be cleanly done.
Yeah. And these 2 episodes do a great job of that, I think. I don't think there's any confusion or haziness.
Well, there's a great opening action scene with the Rotaran and the Defiant pulling a cool maneuver, and for a minute you think, oh, that's great, what a cool scene, and then you find out that they're now gonna like retreat essentially, and that's when O'Brien says, I think he's like attack, retreat. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, well, because one of our leads, O'Brien, says it, and everybody is kind of like looking weary. It's true. Instantly, within 5 minutes, that somehow the war is still going poorly for them and that morale is shit.
Yeah, and Dax, verbalizes that to Sisko. Like, we really need a victory. Like, people cannot keep fighting this hard and keep losing. Like, we got to do something.
I felt like he has the prelude to the kind of the energy of his, like, we're going to take back Deep Space Nine, just in how he's talking to her. He's like, I couldn't agree more. And then she's like, well, then do something about it. And he's like, I have. And it's like a little bit of classic Sisko confidence is already there as a prelude to his big plan.
With the Odo stuff, you kind of mentioned this already, but yeah, this is like he's spending the most time with the founder. That 3 days locked up together.
So that's how the solids do it.
Yeah. So, but I'm not the first person to think of this. This is creepy and disturbing, but I wonder if she did like morph into like the form of Kira. Like, what is it you really want with these solids? You want to bang Kira? I can do that for you.
I don't think she would have, because she brings it up later, and he's always uncomfortable about talking about how that's an unfulfilled desire of his. And I think she doesn't. That's something that is like it's dangerous to her. So I don't think she would have wanted Kira to come into the equation at all. I think she wants to show she's like, this is better than Kira, obviously, right? Like so I think that's probably what she did. Jill in the audience says, "Ugh."
Yeah, it's gross. I love that Morn plays a big, pivotal, important role in the plot here, where he's actually the one who delivers the message about the mines are coming down now. Like, you have to take action immediately.
He sets the timeline through his actions, and Morn, who never speaks, gets to be to prompt the heavy forward momentum. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh yeah, not only are we going to try and take Deep Space Nine, but we need to do it right now. In fact, it could already be too late.
The show has so many valuable assets. Just like a set dressing character like Morn is an incredible asset to the show, and the show knew how to use all those little elements like him.
Even the way that scene is filmed, he's rapping kind of awkwardly. He's tying a bow for a present to take to his mother, I think.
Right. Her birthday. Yeah.
And a finger comes down to hold the bow in place for him to allow him to tie it. And I think the camera pans up and you see the very serious faces of, is it Odo and Kira?
I think it's Kira and Rom and Jake.
Okay. But anyway, they look like...
No, Rom's locked up. It's Kira and Quark and Jake.
Okay. But it's like serious faces, and you're like... they mean business, and I believe the scene just cuts. Like, you don't need to see
Mm-hmm.
them say it. You'll find out subsequently that this is what they're going to do, or they've already said that's what they're going to do. So the scene has that energy of like showing you only what you needed to, and showing it in the like kind of
Yeah.
most interesting way.
Very, very efficient with that. And, you know, they've established before that he's a courier. So, you know, it makes sense he'd be like the guy who could, you know, get get around.
I forgot that. Yeah, that's true.
And Cisco, when Ross is like, "Can we trust this information?" Cisco is like, "I've known this man for 5 years." So I just love, like, Cisco has built up a trust with Morn off screen.
Yeah, yeah,
I love
that's
that.
fair.
Uh,
Um, you know who I wanted to? I want to give a shout out to Rom, who throughout this is very self-sacrificing, of course. And when he's saying like he's like, you guys don't even need to get me out. I accept my fate, basically. But he's like, you guys need to stop. What is it, like the anti-graviton beam, whatever it is that's going
mhm.
to destroy the minefield.
That's what it is.
And he says, he's like, brother, you can do this. You have to do this. You will do this. It's just like when Rom gets his moments, they're, I think, some of the absolute best moments on the show.
Yeah, he really becomes this guy who's like so like pure of heart and
Yeah.
just, you know, cares about everyone else, unlike his brother who tends to be
Yeah.
quite
Well,
selfish.
that's why he's such a good
Foil.
foil, yes, but also I was going to say that's why he was so good at getting information from Damar, because Damar's like,
Oh yeah, this guy's
talks
a
about like he's like, he's like, some people would put the loyalty to their brother above business interests, and Ron Quark's like, not this Ferengi. and
yeah.
knowing what we know of him, you're like, that actually could be true at times. It has been true at times.
Yeah, it makes sense that, yeah, Damar would be like, okay, I can trust this scumbag. So
I have to this is just something I noticed, just a pure little detail. I don't know what it meant. I think it was just a fun thing. But Lita, is that how you say her name? Lita?
yeah,
When she's like thinks that Rom is likely to die, she says, "Oh, Rom," like
well, that's
kind
kind of
of
her catchphrase. That's
okay.
when she
So
fell
she
in
has
love with Rom, she would be like, "Oh, Rom," like,
did I probably mentioned this before, but it strikes me as being so similar to "Oh, Rob" on the old Dick Van Dyke Show, the way Mary Tyler Moore frequently said it. I just wondered, in the same way that Morn is like was always a nod to an '80s sitcom, if this was a callback to a '60s sitcom. Anyway, there's nothing to it other than I find it endearing. It's cute.
and when she does
I
like that little like cry, that whimpering cry that
Yeah,
she does, which is, I think it's almost like borderline too goofy for like these serious moments.
yeah.
But like, I love Chase Masterson so much that like when like I see how sad she looks, like it always makes me start crying when I'm watching this episode.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's I almost think like that could even be a little bit of how Mary Tyler Moore did it, like on certain episodes of Dick Van Dyke Show. I'm not 100% sure. I watched a little growing up, but not a ton. But I'm gonna look into it, and at some point, and just see if there's, if they ever talked about it.
I do like
Yeah,
the
and Jill 47 in the audience is said that she seems to remember that from the Dick Van Dyke Show too.
I do like the Wayoon stuff that we get in this episode. Part of the value of having the Dominion around so much is you know you can learn more about like Vorta culture and society and stuff. The whole thing of like they're
Hmm.
genetically designed not to have any appreciation of aesthetics. He doesn't know. Oh, is
Hmm.
Zial's art good? Is it bad? I don't know. Would it be
Yeah,
better if it
weirdly,
was blue?
in the same way as that one Jem'Hadar soldier in the an episode or two back was like, he knew enough to know that he was in a bad situation and he just still had to go through with it. Wayo knows enough to know that maybe having aesthetics is something that should have been done, but he's like, the founders are gods and gods don't make mistakes. That's his whole thing.
Yeah.
And but he's struggling with it. Some part of him is like, maybe they did, like, on some level he knows that maybe they made a mistake.
Yeah,
He's just, he
what does he
can't
say? Something
articulate
like
it.
sometimes I think it would be nice, if I could carry a tune. Yeah, something
Yeah.
we take for granted. Like everyone enjoys music on some level, but like not a Vorta, I guess. Uh, Weak eyes, good ears. When he can, hear Damar and Ducat's conversation
Yeah.
about Kira. Um, yeah, Ducat's, really creepy here when he's like, "Oh, we're bringing down the mine. I'm gonna have like my big victory. I want Zial to be by my side. It's all about him. It's like yes, like I'm about to
I
defeat
was
the
going to say
entire
that's
Alpha
a perfect
Quadrant, but
example of the way he views Zeal.
yeah, it's like talking about this a little bit with the Diviner and Gwen on
Yeah,
Prodigy, but yeah, like
I need my
she's like an extension of him, and not instead of him thinking of her as like kind of like a separate entity, he sees her more as like an extension of himself, which I think some parents do, um, in real life
right.
with
He
their
wants his
children.
daughter Prop to be impressed.
But I don't know. Is there anything else you want to mention before we get into the big battle?
Let's see. I'm just quick skimming my notes to see if there's anything key in there. Oh, you know what I thought was just a neat little detail in this one was that Cisco, when he's talking to the admiral, I think, said that when all is said and done, that he wants to build a house on Bajor. That he's
Yes.
become so connected to it over time that he really genuinely loves the place and he's invested emotionally in it. Even so, he's like, and the guy is like, "Well, you may still have to have duties to perform," and he's like, "Then I'll perform them," and he's like, "Then I'll go live on Bajor," and I really like that.
Yeah, we saw Kirk had an apartment in San Francisco back on Earth.
Hmm.
He was like, well, Picard, I guess he had like the vineyard when he went home. He went to stay with his brother. Yeah, Cisco is like, no, I want a house on Bajor. Like that's my home. That's my mailing address is on Bajor.
Yeah.
That's where I'm a registered voter.
And that's where I'm considered a god. Um, the,
Sounds like a
that
nice place to live.
doesn't have anything to do with it though. One other thing I wanted to mention is when Kira and Odo have a little come to Jesus moment, or almost do in this one, where he says very sincerely that he's sorry for letting Rom get imprisoned and all that, and she says we are way past sorry, and I thought that was the blunt response that he needed at that point, is to find out how hard he'd hurt her, how much she had betrayed their cause.
I love how one of the first shots of this episode, it's just the Defiant and the Rotaran at Starbase 375.
Hmm.
But then every time we see there's like more and more ships there, and then at the end we have
Yeah,
like that big buildup of ships going off to fight the Dominion. So let's go ahead and talk about
let's do it.
the battle to retake DS9. And so that brings us to Season 6, Episode 6, Sacrifice of Angels, written by Ira Steven Behr and Hans Beimler, directed by Alan Croker. A large fleet of Federation ships heads towards Deep Space Nine to stop the Dominion destroying the wormhole minefield. A Dominion fleet meets them in battle. Can the Defiant make it in time? Well, that's an exciting synopsis, but yeah, really cool CGI battle. This was unlike anything I'd ever seen on television before. Back when I originally watched this in 1997, yeah, 97. I was so
I
impressed
can
with
see
this.
why.
Uh, yeah, Dave, you watched this episode for the first time just days ago, and you messaged me just to point out like that was so cool when the Klingons show up to make a path for the Defiant.
Yeah. I was like, this is one of the great scenes in Star Trek battles. They basically, if we were using video game terminology or something, we'd call it an over-the-shoulder shot of as like the Defiant goes through and like all these ships are closing on them, Cardassian Dominion ships, and the Klingon ships are just rampaging through them. It's just like it'll give you that feel of like like holy shit.
Yeah, it was cool how Martok and Worf is like, well, Galron likes me and he hates you, Worf. So let's go together. Tell him that he needs to send ships to help recapture DS9. When his enemy and his friend are both telling him the same thing, he'll have no choice but to agree with us. I don't know if that would like actually work in political arenas, but it sounded cool. I like that. I like that approach, Martok.
Yeah, it's a good bit of writing, and Klingons are dramatic people. It does seem like the kind of thing that could work on them.
And again, I love like the strategy stuff. We see the Dominion back on the station, planning things out. Dukat basically wants to do what Hannibal did to the Romans. He's like, we're gonna let enough of them in that we can surround them and obliterate them.
Hmm.
Because that was a very
Everybody,
very famous massacre in real history.
everybody at least has some notion of what the other team is doing. Although Dukat uses the scene to kind of embarrass Wei-Yun,
Oh
who's
yeah.
not like he's not a tactical guy
Would you
really.
like to explain the strategy to the founder?
Yeah, he embarrasses Wei-Yun in
Yeah.
front of
Oh, I
the
love that
founder.
rivalry. That's so good. That's so juicy.
Hmm.
That good drama there.
But yeah, I thought that was like Cisco's plan was cool too. His basic thing is Jem'Hadar too disciplined to break, but Cardassians will get hot under the collar and will, if we keep on bashing their ships, they will come after us in force, and we can make a hole in it. And it's like he knows that Dukat knows that realizes that's what they're doing. Cisco realizes it may be a trap when they're going in, and but for the Klingon reinforcements, they probably would have lost.
Yes. Well, a lot of things had to happen for them to win the day in this, but this also has like the charge of the Light Brigade, which was a cool experience for me because like I had just like read this in school
Oh,
like
huh.
less than a year before this episode aired, so I was like, oh, I know that, and because Miles and Bashir are in Starfleet, every Starfleet officer apparently has memorized like all the famous literature. They can quote Shakespeare at the drop of a hat, or anything else, all kinds of poems. T.S. Eliot, who knows what else. But yeah, the Charge of the Light Brigade. I always thought that was like it's about British soldiers getting overwhelmed fighting Russians in Crimea, I think. But
Okay.
I kind of hate that poem now because it's used for a lot of like nefarious purposes, in my opinion. Like
Right.
this is why like there's an honor and a valor to even if you get terrible orders, if you still follow orders, or like a lot of people will say like, oh, this is why like the CIA needs to spy on people so that things like Charge of the Light Brigade doesn't happen. So it's kind of like real life has kind of like tainted that poem for me. But I actually like do like appreciate the poem itself. I find quite lovely.
Right. You can acknowledge that something is stirring while still allowing that it's been politically manipulated and misused
It's basically what Climaticon did. That's the Charge of the Light Brigade. So
right.
but that's a funny moment when Garrick says, "Chief, how does that poem end?" Like,
Yeah.
you don't want to know. You don't want to know. But some people I take that back before I talk about that. The jailbreak of Quark and Zial with the cake and the Cardassian guard, and then shooting the Jem'Hadar. This is
Yeah.
the first time Quark has ever killed people.
Yeah. I feel like this was I've several times over the course of this series have thought, oh, this is Quark's finest hour, and he has a lot of them. So that's a testament,
Yeah.
of course, to their writing overall and his performance. Is it Armin Shimmerman? Is that Quark?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But like the don't move, lower the force field. You told them not to move. Oh, you don't move. You lower the. And the Jem'Hadar like, we should just like murder this dude.
Yeah.
But
And
then
he's
they get
got
shot.
he's got to pull some John Woo action and give him the double guns.
Yeah, or dual wielding, as we would say back in a Halo 2 from
Yeah.
2004.
That also works, by the way, in I believe Dungeons and Dragons. Dual
Okay.
wield is also a thing there.
The end of this episode, though, the Defiant being the one, I've always thought it was so cool. There's like this one ship that makes it through. So they just barely get a ship there to the station, and Rom does all the cool stuff. Odo shows up. Odo brought his security dudes to help out. So and Rom is there to deactivate the graviton beam. And they're just seconds too late. The mines go down. The Defiant has to go into the wormhole to face the Dominion fleet. And this is where some people that are critical of this episode, and I understand why people would say this, but it does get referred, or some people refer to it as a Deus Ex Machina.
Sure.
And
It's as literal
I
a
can,
Deus Ex Machina as you can get because it is literally God's.
it is, but this is why I disagree with that criticism. It's because when people say that, it's like, oh yeah, like the writers, they crafted this big problem and then they weren't able to craft like a good solution, so it's like boom, God fixed it or whatever. That's not what happens here at all, because they could have just had Rom stop the graviton beam in time. That's all they needed to do, and it still would have been this big battle. The Klingons had to come in to help. Odo had to change sides. Quark had to have his big hero moment and show some courage that he's never shown before. All of that stuff would have still had to work out, so it still would have felt like an earned victory. but it's very important that they still fell here because this will pay off more in later episodes. But everyone
That's
needs
what I
to
was going to say. Is I sort of feel like I need to see where it goes to fully judge it, but.
But yeah, I encourage everyone listening to this, like, really remember this point I'm going to make right here, because this is important for like the rest of the show. This playing out the way that it does, this should have been a victory for Dukat. He should have been the guy. He did, everything. He brought in the Dominion to build up Cardassia again. He recaptured the station. He got his throne back where he could, lord over the Bajorans. He was the strategic mastermind who could stop the Federation fleet from getting back to the station. He did every single thing right, and the only reason why he doesn't just defeat the entire Alpha Quadrant, the Klingon Empire, the Federation, all of them, the only reason why he fails is because Sisko has these wormhole aliens, these Bajoran gods on his side. And that was the deciding factor. And that will be a big influence on Dukat for what happens next later on. But this, because of how this plays out, like it actually, it's not a Deus Ex Machina. They didn't have to use the wormhole aliens. They had another. They subverted what would have been like the obvious, earned victory when they had Rom just be like a split second too late.
This is one of those ones where I think, like, to be, it's almost ones where you have to just allow for some faith in the writers. It's like they've never thrown emotional scenes or sudden victories. It's not like it's a habit of them to be doing Deus Ex Machina stuff. So it's like, oh, well, if they did this, I wonder if there's a point to be done or a story arc to be had out of it or whatever.
Yeah. So
and certainly it is not as if the prophets have not played a role since episode 1.
The death of Zial, Dave, what did you think about that? Did you see that coming, or did that hit you hard, or what was your reaction? Did you know about this?
Zial as a character is like, one that's like, I've always sort of felt for her, but I didn't have like special ties to her. Although like the thing where she was actually starting to like get sort of recognized for her art, as someone, by the way, who's been an art student before.
Yeah, you were a young artist once upon a time.
Yeah, I was like, I felt really good for her. I didn't particularly think that she might be on the chopping block. It just didn't occur to me. It's not like I think that she's has like what they would call plot armor or anything like that. I was just like, I just didn't think that was particularly something they were going to do, or I wasn't dwelling on it, and so I was pretty shocked that it just happens, and that really sucks for her. By the way, is like she's been torn apart, between cultures. Kira did so much to try and get her on, the straight and narrow.
She grew up in a Breen prison camp.
Yeah, like she has already had all of these terrible things happen to her, and she was finally getting a little bit of some possibilities in her life. Boom, that's it.
Yeah, it is sad, but for this to really feel like a war, and feel like this earned victory, getting back to the station and everything, like I think it would have rang hollow if someone didn't die.
For sure.
So,
by the way, great line from Sisko when he's calling out the prophets, and he says, "You want to be gods? Then be gods." He definitely told them to do what they did. And like the scene doesn't just randomly happen. There is a sort of a build up to it, and yes, what I'm going to assume will be some fallout from it.
Yeah, and we
I love, by the way, that scene. What made that scene work for me was when Zial tells Dukat that she had helped the prisoners out. So before she dies, they have this moment where he actually does look genuinely pained. Like he's like, he kind of can't believe the betrayal, and yet probably would still help to cover it. Then Damar takes her out of the equation.
Yeah, and when she says, I'm not going with you, Dad, I'm staying here on the station, but then she says, I love you. And you see how as much as we all hate Dukat, he's vile, he's terrible. As much as we all hate him, you do see his eyes light up when, like, that's a big part of what he wanted is, and it's part of his, big ego and everything. But yeah, like, he wants to be loved. He goes about it the entirely wrong way, but yeah, like he wanted someone to recognize him and value him and appreciate him and care about him. And he had a split second of that with Zial, and then Damar. There's a later episode where they actually refer to Damar as like a by the book soldier. He's like, she just confessed to being a traitor, committing acts of treason. I shot her. Like,
right. And that's when they were all pulling out, right? It's not like this was like, oh, we've got lots of time to think about things.
This is after Wei-Un was like, oh, time to pack.
Yeah. I have no idea where this story will go, and that's what's so exciting to me. I'm like, well, I'm going to guess that Dukat is not happy about that, but Dukat also doesn't seem like he's some engine of vengeance at the end of this. Maybe he becomes one. I don't know. He looked broken. He was just broken, and it doesn't
getting
even
shipped
like
off to what it seems at the end. He might be going to the Federation Funny Farm where they kept Dr. McCoy in Star Trek 3.
Doesn't he like? He says, is it Zial that he says, I forgive her and like I forgive you too to Sisko, and gives him back the baseball. Yeah, I was like, oh, I was not expecting that. I thought that Sisko would come and take it from him or something like that. So that was a fascinating scene. Always happy when the show surprises me, which is something it pretty consistently does.
It is cool to see everyone like back on the station and catching up. Sisko and Jake together. Nog is telling his dad, "Look, they made me an ensign. I'm an officer now." All of that. Except for with Garrick. He goes to sickbay and sees dead Zial, and Kira tells him something like like she loved you or something, and I loved Garrick's reaction of like I don't know why, where he's like very he does seem sad that she's gone, but he's also like confused, like why would you ever love someone like me, like which I've always interpreted that, not always, but since we now know that Andy Robinson was playing Garrick as a queer character, I've kind of always assumed like part of that is like, first of all, like, I'm not even into girls. Why were you crushing on me so hard? And then second of all, like,
he hates himself. We know this.
He's
from
done terrible things.
Many scenes. He's many sequences. Yeah. The scene in the end where everybody is getting to reunite, I was surprised that I got teary-eyed to see Jadzia and Worf reunited, because although I always liked them fine, I didn't I wasn't fully buying into it, maybe, or maybe I just wasn't attached to them as a couple until I saw them reunited. There's something about that, and then I was like, okay, enough time has passed that now that I've seen them in sort of like enough situations that I liked them as a couple, and it was really sweet seeing them get their moment.
The last thing I have to say on this episode, another cool Martok moment, I think, is they had the bet on whoever steps foot on the station first will have to get the other a barrel of blood wine. Yep. And Sisko
a bet from like an episode or two back.
Yes, and Sisko does get on before Martok. I think when the Rotaran got here, I think Martok was like, hold up, this needs to be Sisko's victory. Let him set foot on the promenade first. And the reason why I think that is because there's a later episode where they make like another bet, and I was like, oh, I see what you're doing, Martok. You gave him that one so that you can get this other bet. But we'll get to that at some other point.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
But speaking of Klingons and Worf and Jadzia and Martok, we have a Klingon wedding episode to talk about, which this is a fun one, because I don't know if you're going to like this, hate this, or be somewhere in between, but I'm just going to read the doobly-doo stuff that I read. This is season 6, episode 7, You Are Cordially Invited, written by Ronald D. Moore, directed by David Livingston. The matriarch of the House of Martok challenges Worf and Dax's marriage. Dave, what do you think?
In some ways, it's my least favorite episode of these 9, but that we've just watched. But I also couldn't deny many good scenes in it. Like, oh man, I loved when like O'Brien and Bashir are hanging. I think, or was it Bashir?
Kill Worf. Yes.
Yeah. It's basically the brutal Klingon bachelor party stuff, and he's like I have had a vision, which is of course what this is supposed to inspire. And he's like, I'm going to kill Worf. It was so funny. And I actually love the ending of the episode. I think the last 5 minutes are fantastic. So they they brought me around on it. What I did not like about the episode was I didn't like Dax having to rein in who she was for the matriarch of the Martok family.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a bad message. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes in a relationship, one person just has to give up everything they want to make the other one happy, and it's like, well, there shouldn't like compromise factor in there. Uh, that is something I wish they had done different. It is a little unique in their case because Dax has lived for centuries, has had many marriages, so it is kind of like, yeah, like let Worf have this one, but
Right. The scene where she and Kira are talking early on is a good scene, and I love, by the way, that opening where you get to see Cisco actually beam a little bit with like just
oh
being
yeah,
back where he was,
the
and
flags coming down on the promenade and
yeah,
everyone
and
being more happy. We needed this after the last 6 episodes. We really
yeah,
needed this.
and Kira recognizes how happy he is, and it was
Hmm.
it's a good example of like how they can stage things on Deep Space Nine, where you can have like a wartime season, but you can have these moments of calm and even happiness in it. Um, so yeah. But yeah, I like Dax at some point, or she tells Kira, she's like, exactly why she's doing it. She's like, yeah, she's like, the wedding itself doesn't have a lot of meaning for her, and so she's kind of willing to let it be Worf's thing.
But it was
At
it was
some
her
point,
idea. It was her idea to do it on the station because Alexander is about to get shipped off, so
right.
we should do it here where your son can be your best man.
Doesn't Quark just jump in and say he's like, just do it on the station or whatever? And
He had been trying to sell them on doing it at his bar for a while.
right,
I'm sure he made a pretty penny, catering and everything.
right.
It is a
But
very extravagant wedding after all, so
Dax and the presence of Alexander and her pitch for that, doing it before his son leaves, son who he's only now finally starting to make some connections with,
yeah.
but is still clearly a little bit of the doofus.
I like him.
That
I wish that we could have got like Alexander and Jake and Nog like hanging like hey,
mm,
you're like Quark's nephew and you're Cisco's son and I'm Worf's son and we're
yeah, that would have been a cool putting together of characters.
I'm sad to inform you that like right here, like right after like they figured out what to do with Alexander and
That's it.
he's interesting. This is the last we ever see of him. So
I think that they probably were like, they wanted to address it. They were like, this is just too big a thing to not address, but like once it's done, we've got more important fish to fry or
yeah,
whatever.
we have so many recurring characters on this show, but I feel
Yeah.
like there is potential there. Who knows? Maybe he shows up in Picard season 3. I don't know. I'm sure he'll be recast yet again, but it could happen.
And the one where they were down on that, was it on Risa? Was it where they were having, they were vacationing, like Worf
Yeah.
and Dax and them? And I was really kind of annoyed at Worf's, like his conservative views coming out on that one. I appreciated in this one that when is it Sorella, Martok's wife?
Yes,
When
and
she
I love
comes to
her.
the station and she's like, Martok saying, yeah, she doesn't really like outsiders coming in and polluting our pure Klingon heritage or whatever.
Oh, when Worf calls
just
it
straight up says, he's like, that's xenophobic.
yeah, that is
Like,
an outdated and xenophobic belief. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the Starfleet in them showing.
yeah,
So
that's a good job, Worf. That is something you should have taken from
yeah,
Starfleet.
good that there's 7 years on the Enterprise, like something sink in. Let's talk about like Sorella's like introduction when she steps out of the docking ring and just like she is just laying into Martok so hard, like oh you've gotten even more fat. Oh I'm surprised you're even still alive. And just Martok, the way that he's just like rolling with it, just like zinger after zinger with like, yes, my deterioration is proceeding on schedule, but I will try to die hopefully soon. It's just
Yeah, it seems like it's clearly part of their relationship.
Yeah.
I don't know if that is particularly healthy. When I was thinking for the first time the other, like a few episodes back, when Dax was joking about how she wasn't, gonna like, even like want to apply to the House of Martok or whatever, and Worf gets all worked up, and then she's like smiling and she's like, I'm just kidding. I was
just
like,
kidding.
I feel like in what would they call it, in BDSM circles, she would be a brat. The submissive that pokes at the dom.
Yeah, she
and I was
totally
like,
is.
this seems like this might this is a recurring sort of thing, and I feel like this is sort of the BDSM side of the Klingon relationship here.
We know that Worf is into, really rough sex. That's a thing. That's in canon. That's well established. So yeah, I
Right.
think that's how they play. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of fun stuff with like their two different versions of like their bachelor parties. Like I feel like Dax had the more fun party, but I kind of like the Worf stuff too. I thought that was it was funny, and it's like like when Martok and Worf, they're kind of like teasing everyone else. They're like, I don't know if you non-Klingons can keep up with us, but then they're like singing like at the fireside when they're singing the Klingon war songs and stuff like that. That was fun for me. I love that Klingon shit like that.
Well, because they had done those episodes where the Klingon singing on the Rotaran was such a big thing, and I got chills watching it, it meant more now. But there was also a lot of funny stuff when they're like, what are the other 5 trials? Blood, pain, sacrifice, anguish, and death.
Yeah. I
which did lead to Bashir saying like something kind of trashy. He's like, yep, that sounds like marriage. And I was like, all right, Bashir.
Then like the back and forth, like the wedding's off, the wedding's on. They had like all that food. They had like that huge spread at Quark's, and like the moment of like there none of that for those on the path to Kalhaya, and then Quark is like no refunds either.
Someone mentioned in the comments Nog's dance, and that was one of the highlights for me. That
was created by Aaron Eisenberg himself, and that was David Livingston, the director.
Man.
He did something like you normally don't do, but like the way that they shot this, he was like, let's have like real music, real people actually playing the drums, real Polynesian guy spinning the fire shit around, like all that stuff. Like people just like talk, dance, like joke around and stuff. He's just like, Aaron, just like do something, like dance like a Ferengi would dance or something. And this is what he came up with. And David Livingston, I got to meet him in Vegas and talk to him too. He's a cool dude. He's directed more episodes of Star Trek than anyone else ever. But yeah, I thought that was like a really, really genius way of shooting this, which they rarely do in television or movies and stuff, and it paid off, I thought.
I agree, and I feel like that felt like a Ferengi dance.
The two scenes at the end though of like Martok has like the talk with Worf about how we don't get to pick like the ones that we love, and you clearly love Jadzia. You'd be foolish to back out of this now. And then Sisko talking to Jadzia, which we agree it is a little messed up, where he's just like, just suck it up, old man, just like let Worf have his way. It is kind of messed up, but I love that, like that chemistry, and the shot of Jadzia like resting on Sisko and like hugging him and embracing him, just like whatever happened, that young ensign who had hair who like turned to me for advice. And just it's one of my favorite moments in all of DS9. Especially
it's
stuff that happens later.
Those actors can sell it. It's a great visual.
And then the ceremony itself, I like that it references like the Klingon, the early Klingons who slayed the gods who created them. The ending when the cool thing about being going into the bachelor party and getting tortured is you get to have your revenge on the happy couple. You get to beat them up with those sticks. What are they called? Masakas or no, not whatever they were called. But it's like,
I didn't catch the name.
But Bashir being like now, and like Martok being like, wait doctor, and then he's like now, and then like the cut to black is like you're hearing them like hit Worf and Jadzia. It's a little cheesy, but I love it.
That was actually that actually sold me on the episode. Although I also did like the sort of formal ceremony, and could appreciate Cirilla, and Dax kind of bonding, even if I knew it was a little bit of a dated thing that led to that little story point. But I love the ending to it.
Well, the next episode we're going to talk about Resurrection. We've actually talked about it before back in 2018. We talked about all the Mirror Universe episodes of DS9 back when we were talking about a bunch of Mirror Universe stuff. So people can go check that out for more for more details. Dave, you probably have like a different perspective on it now, especially like now that you know who Vedic Bareil is, because he's the guy who like comes back in this. I'm
For
not gonna have a
sure.
ton to say. Just let me set this one up. But yeah, this is episode 8, Resurrection, written by Michael Taylor, directed by LeVar Burton. An alternate version of Vedic Bareil arrives from the mirror universe seeking refuge. When we talked about it before, we thought it was like the least interesting of the DS9 Mirror Universe episodes. I still stand by that. In fact, this is the weak link for me out of these 9 episodes we're discussing now. It's probably my third. Yeah, it's my third least favorite of season 6. I love season 6. It's probably my favorite season of any Star Trek show ever.
Mm-hmm.
But there's 3 episodes in here that I'm just kind of like meh on, or one that I actually genuinely dislike. But yeah, this is one of those 3. But I don't know. What about you?
Um, I liked it pretty solidly. I think, roughly on the same level as the wedding episode, which is a sort of mixed episode. I do like the Deep Space Nine, or the Mirror Universe stuff in DS9. So I liked seeing the Intendant back. I think that, like, as a plot, it's not a bad one. But it's arguably ground they've covered with Cisco and Mirror Universe Jennifer, and that sort of weird thing where it's like, oh, what would it be like? I did really like the scene where Cisco talks to Kira about the appearance of somebody who looks like her ex, but they know is from the mirror universe. And he's like, I know exactly what it is. It's like you look at them and they're not the same person, but sometimes the light will catch them in such a way, or they'll put on an expression, and you kind of feel like maybe they are that person or could be that person. And so I really like that idea behind it. And I like the actor who plays Bareil. I think he does a good job playing a kind of a sleazy version of himself.
Yeah.
Very much a Han Solo kind of guy, a jaded guy with a little bit of a heart of gold by the end of it. I almost wish they had refocused a little bit more on what seemed like an interesting moral question early on, which is, oh, what would can you accept refugees from the mirror universe? What would that entail? But that wasn't the story they were telling. But the Intendant's plan to steal a religious artifact from the Prime universe and use it to be kind of a messiah type figure on the Bajor of her world.
Yeah,
that's a solid plan.
Yeah, if you recall, the last time we saw her way back in season 4, she was kind of on the outs in the Alliance. Regent Worf is this.
Oh right.
High ranking dude in the Alliance. He's mad at her, and she's kind of on the run from the Alliance. So yeah, she kind of wanted Bajor to break off, be an independent thing under her command. The notable thing for me, I guess, a lot of people complain about Bareil and say he's boring and stuff. I think there are moments when he's really interesting. I think when he that episode where he's under the influence of Luoxana and he's getting flirty, and who is he? I think he's hitting on Dax is the one he was going after. I think he's good at the comedic stuff, and I do like his performance here quite a bit. I've seen this episode so many times, but it always stings kind of the reveal at the end. Whenever he's talking to Kira in bed, or describing his life growing up in the mirror universe, it always comes off as so genuine, and I'm sure there's a lot of truth baked into that. But I know the reveal. I don't forget it when I'm watching it. I remember that, but it always has a bit of an impact. So as much as I don't like this episode compared to the rest of season 6, I do appreciate that part of it quite a bit. I think that's impressive that it always has that effect on me.
You know what I'll say is, I think that I agree, and to the point that it's almost too bad that this is one of those cases where I think there's not quite an organic follow through on the show. This is the kind of thing that would, I think, affect you for a good while. Somebody you were that was one of the big loves of your life returns, is revealed to be a traitor, and leaves and manipulated you and all this, and could very well be dead in the mirror universe, but maybe not, you don't know. That's something that would leave a mark on you, and I kind of wish that there was a little bit of follow-up in the next few episodes. But
and I like I guess that Quark is kind of, when you have that conversation with Quark, and he's like, oh, what if we set up the scam where you dress up as Bareil and all this. I don't know if I'm sure Quark was probably open to that because he is such a sleazy
hustler
capitalist, but
yeah,
I think he was also trying to figure this dude out, and he had an idea. You know, you kind of see him like eyeing the Bajoran temple, making
Well,
plans to steal
he
the
rats him
orb.
out.
He rats him out, but I think he was doing this kind of confirm, you know, is this guy really like that big of a scumbag? And even though that Bareil doesn't go along with it, Quark still says, I can see like the guilt behind your eye. Yeah, you say you hate people like me because, you know, you're a scumbag too, and you hate yourself. That's why. So that's, uh, I think he was trying, you know, to get confirmation on that before he went to Kira.
Yeah, this is the slightly nobler Quark of the current moment.
Yeah, the earlier seasons of DS9, Quark would have asked for something in return.
Right.
So
Or the deal would have been all he cared about, like I want him to become, I want to be his partner in crime.
yeah, uh, but yeah, I don't have too much else. I guess the him stealing the mek'leth under from Worf. I thought that was kind of cool at the dinner party with
Oh yeah.
Jadzia and Worf. And I guess we get to see like married couple Jadzia and Worf, you know, doing things like inviting other couples over. Oh, and I guess like the Odo Kira stuff of Odo and Kira avoiding each other.
They finally sort of break that ground. I sort of almost would have liked to have seen that as a somewhat more serious conversation.
Or yeah, that was in the previous episode where they had like that talk in the bathroom at Dax's quarters. But
Yeah. But so you know, of course they needed to cover that, and maybe I don't know that there was a lot of great, you know, dialogue and insight to be had, but it does seem like the Kira that said we're well past sorry. I kind of wanted to see how exactly what it was he said.
You wanted to see the conversation, and so that I always thought it was like kind of tasteful.
How did they remend?
Yeah. I kind of appreciate just like it all happened off screen and they just talked like all night through and they talked their way through it and like we didn't see it because we can't see this, you know, 9 hour long conversation or whatever. But I also understand, yeah, it would have been cool to actually like have that play out on screen.
The show usually does show those conversations, usually
right.
show those moments. So, like, yeah, I can't begrudge them occasionally saying, like, this one just happens to have happened off screen. You kind of knew where it was headed, so let's accept that, of course, these characters can forgive each other.
Yeah. It is cool seeing, like, Nana visitors as the Intendant and Kira when they're both wearing, like, the same wardrobe. Because you really do, like, you can immediately tell who is who. And so that's
she had
acting.
the walk. She had the sexy walk.
Yeah.
And she treats the world like she's Caligula. So
But that's the last of Mirror Bareil. So I don't know if the Intendant kills him or what happens, but we never find out. So you have
I'll
to
write
use your
that book
imagination.
one day.
The last episode we're going to talk about tonight is Statistical Probabilities, teleplay by Renee Echeverria, story by Palm Pietroforte, directed by Anson Williams. Bashir helps a group of eccentric fellow genetically engineered humans try to make a useful contribution to the Federation. The Dominion offers to sign a truce with the Federation. So the Augments have gotten a lot of talk and screen time and exploration and Strange New Worlds and Prodigy lately, but here's Deep Space Nine doing it back in the 90s of, you know, these Augments trying to escape the shadow of Khan and the eugenics wars. But they didn't call them Augments, they called them mutants
in a much more serious way than I expected.
I don't like them being called mutants.
I actually... It seems like it would be derogatory, but, you know, I guess that's years of X-Men. So I actually, when this episode started, I was very worried for a few minutes.
Because of Jack?
No, because it was directed by Potsy from Happy Days. No, I'm just kidding. It was, though. But because, yes, I thought they were going to, like, essentially they're framing these Augments as, you know, people dealing with mental illness. That's the sort of the vibe of it. And I was like, oh, they're all kind of like caricatures. They're very over the top. And you know, that's true. That is true. But I found their treatment of them pretty appealing, and I found the characters appealing. Even if it does veer a little bit into that Rain Man type thing where it's like, oh, they become cool because they're useful, they're savants. And I sort of was very aware of that sort of approach to it. But instead of doing I thought the episode was going to be all about, oh, can he make a breakthrough and talk to him? Like that was happening in movies like Rain Man and Awakenings with Robin Williams and stuff like that. And I kind of thought this would be their own take on it. And instead, that actually happens quite early on, and it's more just kind of how things evolve from that. And I actually did end up liking Jack and those other characters. I found them all pretty endearing, even if I know it's not. It's like kind of rooted in somewhat over the top tropes.
Yeah. I've heard some people, be critical of this episode, thinking like it seems weird that the Federation would have these people locked up, but like they're not imprisoned. They're like in a like an institute, a hospital type scenario. Three of these four people, I'm convinced, probably can't be independent, functional in society, living on their own. With Jack, he's the violent one. Sometimes he like cuts people's hands and threatens to blow people out airlocks and stuff. Patrick is I guess simple-minded, I guess, very childlike. Serena is like the catatonic one. She's very like, I would think, non-functional, be left to her own.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why Lauren has to be hospitalized. She is just like real flirty. She wanted to flirt with all the boys and probably wants to do more than flirt, but like she seems like a fairly functional person. I don't know. There could be like other sides to her that we don't.
If she was like if she's meant to like be a little bit like somebody with borderline personality disorder or something like that, where she's like hyper impulsive, and that's always essentially getting her into trouble. But yeah, they don't. She seems more like she would be able to function potentially. She seems almost exclusively devoted to her flirtatiousness, though, when she's not analyzing with them. So maybe that's the problem.
In that little like dinner party or whatever, where Bashir is telling the rest of the main characters about these people he's dealing with, you kind of have people talk about their opinions on how to deal with. I'm just going to call them augments because that's what the rest of Star Trek will adopt. But Worf is very like TNG Worf, where he's kind of like the dude with like the asshole opinion. He's like, well, they shouldn't be completely free. We need to keep an eye on. You let some of the good ones, have jobs and stuff. But obviously they shouldn't be allowed to compete freely. And Bashir has to be like, well, what about me? Do you feel that way about me and stuff?
He's like, no, you're one of the good ones.
I did like when they're able to, analyze Damar's speech, and it is, I guess, a little goofy how they're like, oh, Weyoun is the Dark Knight, and Zial's the Slayed Princess, and all this stuff, but when they're actually, like, the little details when they're like, oh no, like, play back this hologram Weyoun, like what he said in the actual Dominion E's, not the translation, and oh look,
that was a cool bit.
Yeah,
that
it was a cool
very idea.
Cool. Jeffrey Combs said that was a bitch to do, just like shooting that, having to play the scene in English and then having to match that and speak this made up gobbledygook that doesn't mean anything to him, but still have like the same like inflections and stuff. He said that was like one of the hardest things he's done.
And that scene was cool in general because of the way it was like interacting with a holodeck, CSI kind of thing, where you're like almost like replay that scene, or it's like the scene in Blade Runner with the photograph and the Esper machine. It's essentially an evidentiary use of the holodeck. That was just a cool use of it.
And
boy, if you were to that one panel you just had up, Fatheree, where they have the party hats on, if you were to just show that one panel, somebody would be like, "This looks like the goofiest episode of Star Trek ever."
Well, I was talking to our friend Aaron, aka Geek Filter, the other day, and he was saying like, people that say Deep Space Nine is too dark for Star Trek, like, are you not paying attention to all the goofy shit that's in there? It's not a dark show. It has some dark moments, but there's a lot of like lightheartedness throughout the entire 7 seasons.
Its ethos is more serious and is more likely to call out hypocrisy and let tragedy kind of sink in, rather than be like something that occurs in 5 minutes and then you're done with. But yeah, like throughout the whole thing, they have lots of Trek silliness, fun, flirtatiousness. A lot of the things that are part of Trek's lighter side.
Yeah. And before we had a Star Trek show that is a dedicated comedy, I said for years, the 2 Star Trek shows that did comedy the best were the original series and DS9. And DS9 got to do more comedy because it had more seasons. So for a long time, I considered DS9 the funniest Star Trek show.
Yeah, for sure. Other than like TOS, it's the one that that has made me laugh out loud the most.
Yeah. They could pull it off, but we get a classic Trek moral quandary here, and a lot of like the DS9, it is balancing like what do you do here? Do you shoot these Jem'Hadar and side with Kevin, even though he's a jerk? here we get like another one of those like, oh, do we end the war? Do we surrender because it'll save 900 billion lives?
Yeah, the numbers they were talking about were insane.
Yeah, the world population just hit 8 billion. So imagine like 100 Earths. That's only 800 billion. You're still shy of like nine. It's unfathomable. Like that many deaths, that many funerals, that many lives ending.
And in that sense, you can see how they're very much like the Paul Atreides prescience in Dune. Their foresight, you can be like, oh, well, we took them seriously on one thing, and it was clearly good advice. Which, by the way, I thought that was a whole cool idea of the concession that gets them a planet where they can make Ketracel white. Very like neat idea there. But yeah, it's like, well, do we take them seriously when it comes to something as huge as surrendering all of the Federation in order to save those lives? That is a real test, and you could arguably do both more serious sci-fi around it or more stories from Star Trek had they wanted to.
Yeah, and I don't know, like, do I agree with Bashir? Like, these are the numbers, we need to accept reality. Do I agree with Sisko? Like, you can't ask the entire Alpha Quadrant to lay down and surrender. Like, we have the right to go down fighting if that's who we are. I don't know who
but
I agree with.
Ask, but it's like that's the military leaders who's saying we have the right. It's always like, it's like, oh, do the soldiers get any right? Do their families? Do the other, all the innocents that are killed have the right to go down fighting? Do they want that right?
Yeah,
this wasn't an episode This wasn't an episode to examine it from every angle like that, but
yeah,
I love
they
that
bring it up. They do the Trek thing of like, we're going to ask questions and we're not going to give you the answer. It's just something to think about. It's just kind of a thought
experiment. Not something that I expected the episode to do when I was 10 minutes into it.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I was faced with this, even if I was just like a civilian living in the Alpha Quadrant. Yeah, do I want to like live under the oppression of this fascist dictatorship and hope that like one of my descendants centuries from now will have a successful revolution? Or do I want to say like no, like fuck these bastards. I'm gonna go down fighting them. Like I mean I don't know. Like I see the advantages of both those outlooks, and the I guess the convenient wrap up that we get just to have a conclusion to the story they're telling is that like, oh well, these projections don't seem to know everything. So
right. And I think that actually works pretty nicely for story purposes. I could have sworn, by the way, that the nonverbal augment was going to have the moment where she speaks and breaks the silence and says something
that
really
was
wise.
Originally planned, but I guess they thought it'd be cooler to not do that.
I'm glad they didn't, because I was so sure that it was going to happen, which means I was aware of the trope of, well, when this person who can't talk talks, it's always must be so deep and meaningful.
Yeah, I like the way that they gave her like the one meaningful thing of, I mean, I guess she does like give them some math at one point on that pad, but here, like when she frees Bashir so that he can stop the rest of them from turning over the classified documents to Weyoun and Damar. I'm laughing because I just remembered when Odo goes to round up Weyoun and Damar, and Weyoun's just like, oh, we seem to have gotten lost. Odo's like, they're not coming. Or like when he's like, let me guess, I bless you, I grace you with my presence.
Yeah,
it was fun Odo stuff, but
and it was fun to see Weyoun and like flat-footed like that.
Yeah.
A little lightheartedness.
We get more development with Damar here. They pick up on it, but they're like, oh yeah, this guy, he feels guilty. He feels guilty for shooting that girl.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and that's interesting. That's a side I hadn't quite expected to see of him. But from the comments, I have inferred that Damar has still more facets to show me.
Yes, we will see. There might not be more Alexander, but there will be more Damar. There will be more war. There's a lot of good stuff coming up. I had a great time talking about these episodes with you, Dave. I don't know if there's anything else that you need to say before we
I only wanted to mention that Jack's particular sort of stammering manner of talking was effective enough that I kind of found myself wanting to talk like that.
Oh, whoa. You want to talk like Jack? You want to talk like really fast? What?
It's almost like it was like a slight comedy bit, and that was his affectation. And I was like, oh yeah, like I'm going to tell his jokes afterwards, and of course I'm going to do the bit.
That actor originally auditioned to play Bashir. he lost to Dig, but obviously
it's interesting.
But,
I could see it.
Yeah,
but yeah.
I could see him be like this young genius doctor. He could probably pull that off. But I like him as Jack, so it all worked out. I think that was probably the role for him, and Bashir's the role for Sadig.
For sure. This actually ended up being an episode where, like, I don't know that it's objectively a great episode, but like I liked it a lot more than I expected it to, and I found all the augments very endearing. So
I think it's an episode it's easy for a lot of people to dismiss, but it's also easy for a lot of people to be like, oh yeah, there's actually something going on here. So it just depends.
And I was happy to see that they addressed the augment issue at all, and then pretty seriously.
Yeah, and there's more augment stuff in the episodes to come before we hit the end of the show. So
right on.
But yeah, that'll be it for this week. But there's still a lot more Deep Space Nine. We're closing in on the end, but there's still a lot to cover. We have 9 more episodes to talk about next week. That's gonna be everything from season 6, episode 10, The Magnificent Ferengi, all the way through season 6, episode 18, Inquisition. There's some stuff I am just dying to talk about with y'all next week, so that'll. And I also want to ask Dave because I have no idea how he's going to react to some of this stuff. So
seems like it's all pretty big at this point.
Yeah. So the war rages on, and there's a lot of neat things going on in these next few episodes. So we will be back next week live Friday at 7 p.m. Central. You can listen to the show wherever you get your podcast. And until then, as always, live long and prosper, y'all.
Listen to the Tex-Trek podcast through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or at tex-trek.com. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/tex-trek. And follow Fatheree on Twitter at TXTrek. Please support us by liking our videos and subscribing to our channel on YouTube. Thank you and take care.